Have you ever wondered if there's a pattern to how great economies fall? Well, one analysis we're looking at today says there absolutely is. It's a 500-year-old cycle, and it argues we might be in the final stage right now. So let's dive into that idea. Okay, let's start with a number, a really, really big number, $38 trillion. According to the source material we're breaking down, that's where America's national debt is projected to be by the end of 2025. I mean, it's a figure so huge, it's hard to even wrap your head around. But for this analysis, that number is the trigger for everything else that follows. And here's the core claim from the source. The so-called smart money, we're talking major institutions, the big players, they already see what's on the horizon. The argument is that behind the scenes, they've started quietly moving their capital out. The source actually calls this a silent exodus, and it's framed as the first major warning sign that a huge shift is happening. Right, so that's the central question we're exploring. This isn't just some abstract number on a government website. It's about what the most powerful and informed financial players are doing in response to it. Why are they quietly moving trillions of dollars around the globe? What do they know? Well, the framework this particular analysis puts forward is pretty fascinating. It suggests that what's happening right now isn't some random chaotic event. Instead, it's a predictable, almost mathematical pattern, a cycle with really clear stages that has apparently brought down global superpowers before, not once, but 3 times in the last 500 years. So let's unpack that cycle. The source calls it the 4-stage cycle. And really, understanding these 4 stages is the key to grasping their entire argument about where the US might be today. The basic idea here is pretty straightforward. It's that dominant economic powers don't just, fade away by chance. This analysis suggests they follow a very specific, almost mechanical path, from the absolute peak of their power to a really sudden and often chaotic collapse. And here are the 4 stages. First up, stage 1 is ascension. This is when a nation becomes the center of global finance. It's the place to be. Then comes stage 2, overextension. This is where that success leads to massive spending, and you guessed it, debt that grows way faster than the actual economy. After that, we hit the really critical part, stage 3, the silent exodus. This is a pretty short window, maybe 18 to 36 months, where the insiders quietly get their money out. And that leads directly to stage 4, the collapse. We're talking a currency implosion, the whole system just seizing up. Okay, so you might be thinking, is this just some neat theory? Well, the analysis says absolutely not. It actually points to 3 huge historical examples to argue that this pattern is very real, a pattern that it says stretches back over half a millennium. So let's go back in time. First up, the Spanish Empire in the 1500s. At that point, Spain was the undisputed global superpower. They were fueled by all that gold and silver flowing in from the Americas. They were, for all intents and purposes, the center of the known world. And here's how the source maps Spain's story onto that 4-stage pattern. For ascension, you had the Spanish real as the world's reserve currency. Easy enough. For overextension, constant wars pushed their spending to an unbelievable 300% of their revenue. Can you imagine? Then came that silent exodus, as the big banking families of the day saw the writing on the wall and moved their capital to safer cities. And the end result? Collapse. A whole series of devastating debt defaults that completely shattered the empire's financial power. So where did that money go? After Spain's fall, all that capital flowed north, right into the Dutch Republic. Amsterdam became the richest city on earth. Think of it as the Silicon Valley and Wall Street of its day, all rolled into one incredible powerhouse. And according to this analysis, the cycle repeated almost to a T. For ascension, the Dutch guilder became the new global reserve currency. For overextension, their debt exploded. It went up 20-fold, fueled by wars and, of course, the infamous tulip mania bubble. Then, the silent exodus. The insiders knew the Bank of Amsterdam was secretly broke, so they started shifting their operations to London. And then, the collapse. A French invasion basically exposed all the rot, and the Dutch Golden Age came to a screeching halt. Now, the capital that fled Amsterdam found its next safe harbor in London, and that kicks off the 3rd historical example, the mighty British Empire. For more than 200 years, the pound sterling was the undisputed king of global finance, no question. And the argument is that this pattern held true yet again. Ascension. Britain's global empire was just absolute. Overextension. The massive cost of 2 world wars buried the nation in debt. The silent exodus.
Capital, corporations, and wealthy families started flowing across the Atlantic to the United States. And finally, the collapse. A massive currency devaluation in '67, followed by the ultimate humiliation, having to get a bailout from the IMF in 1976.
So, there you have it. 3 empires, 3 collapses, all following what the source claims is an identical pattern. And that, of course, brings us right to the heart of the argument, that the United States isn't an exception to the rule, but is simply the 4th iteration of this 500-year cycle. Now, the evidence presented for Stage 2, the overextension phase, is all about the explosive growth of U.S. national debt. Just look at these numbers, from $900 billion in 1980 to a projected $38.4 trillion by late 2025. That's a mind-boggling increase. But what's really telling is the acceleration at the end. The debt has more than doubled in just the last few years alone. And this is where the comparison to past empires gets, well, pretty stark. The analysis points out that Britain's decline really kicked into gear when its debt-to-GDP ratio, that's the country's total debt compared to its entire economic output for a year, hit 130%. Spain defaulted at 200%. The calculation used in the source for the U.S. today? A staggering 370%, far, far beyond the tipping point of those previous empires. So, here's the crucial conclusion the source draws from all this. Based on that historical pattern and the current debt levels, the analysis concludes that the U.S. isn't just heading for Stage 3, it's already deep inside it. The silent exodus, that quiet movement of capital, has already begun. And what's the evidence for that claim? Well, the source points to a few things. Foreign governments are selling off U.S. debt in huge numbers. China and Japan have offloaded hundreds of billions worth. And it's not just governments. Some of the world's largest asset managers, names you know like BlackRock and JP Morgan, are reportedly advising their clients to diversify away from having too much exposure to U.S. dollar assets. Okay, so if the U.S. really is in Stage 3, the next logical question is, what does the pattern predict for Stage 4? And probably more importantly for all of us, what could that actually mean for everyday people? The prediction for Stage 4 is pretty grim, not gonna lie. The idea is that as other countries move away from using the US dollar for global trade, all those trillions of dollars held overseas would come flooding back into the US economy. The source argues this would trigger uncontrollable inflation, and that would force a terrible choice. Either you have crushing interest rate hikes to stop it, or you let hyperinflation run wild. Either way, the predicted outcome is a severe simultaneous crash in everything: stocks, bonds, even real estate. So what's the takeaway here? Well, this analysis doesn't just lay out the problem. It also suggests a few practical steps someone might consider. Things like diversifying into hard assets like gold or silver, things that can't just be printed out of thin air. It talks about geographic diversification, cutting personal debt, and, investing in things that are always valuable no matter what, your own skills and your relationships. And all this brings us to the final big question. The source makes a really compelling case based on 500 years of data that this specific, predictable cycle is unfolding right now. Of course, many people would argue that the U.S. is different, that its military, its technology, its spirit of innovation make it immune to these old historical patterns. But the source contends that every single one of those previous empires thought the exact same thing right before they fell. So the question it leaves us with is this time really different?